What is going on to YouTube Lamont at large on a different channel? Today, I'm in one of my many hats, standing here in Apple Valley, California. We're at the Sunset Memorial Garden Cemetery. I'm here to visit the grave of Roy Rogers and his wife, Dale. Roy, of course, is known as the King of the Cowboys. Briefly talk about his life, his career, and visit their final resting place. Without further ado, let's get rocking and rolling. Roy Rogers was born Leonard Franklin Sly from the great state of Ohio, Cincinnati to be exact, on November 5th, 1911. By the way, I wish I was in Ohio right now. I wish I was in Ohio. Anyways, as we continue. So Roy probably got his love for music because his father was a guitar player and his mom was a singer. Now, Leonard, we're going to call him Leonard because that's his real name. Originally, he wanted to be a doctor. However, when he was about 17 years old, his aspirations and dreams of becoming that doctor quickly fell to earth and crashed into the ground when realizing that, well, his family was poor. See, Leonard's father, he had the great idea that, I'm going to try to buy a farm and raise my kids off the food that we grow and then sell the excess food or whatever, produce, vegetables, all that good stuff. However, quickly it was realized that that was not going to happen. Difficult to feed a family with 4 children and a wife at that farm. So his dad would eventually get a job at a shoe factory in Portsmouth, and then he would stay in Portsmouth throughout the week, and then he'd go back to the farm on the weekend. So later on, after Leonard had to drop out of school, he got a job with his dad at the U.S. Shoe Company, right? That's got to be good times, right? It's 1930, 1929, 1930, something around there, and you're working at a shoe factory with your dad. So one day, Leonard's dad was like, "Hey, son." And Leonard said, yeah, Pa, what's going on? What's going on, Papa? And he says, "Do you like working here at the U.S. Shoe Factory?" And Leonard said, he turned around and he said, "Well, what the hell do you think?" Now, he actually didn't say that. I don't think Leonard or Roy swore, but so he says, "Hey, listen, why don't we go out to California and check it out and see whether we like it or not." Now, Leonard, or Roy, we're just going to call him Roy from now on. So Roy's sister, Mary, older sister, had moved out to Lawndale, California with her husband. And, they would write back and say, "Oh, this is great. It's great. California is great." Now, not so much, but back then, I'm sure it was a pretty cool thing. So the family, they packed up and they went out to California for about 4 months, and they liked it. The winters were very, very, very mild. I mean, 60 degrees during the daytime is considered pretty cool. And, well, they liked it. So they went back to Ohio to, gather up the rest of their things and, do whatever, tie up, stuff that they had to do. And then they came back to California. Now, everything was going great. Everything was going fine. So the father and son duo team, they got a job at a construction company paving roads. Roy's dad was a truck driver. And then, well, what do you know? Guess what happened? The Great Depression. Well, lots of people lost their livelihoods. Lots of people lost their homes, their businesses. Lots of people lost their lives by their own hands. It was a very, very dark and dreary, sad time in our nation's history. That is for sure. Now, things got so bad for Roy and his dad, they ended up having to go up to Tulare, which is about 175 miles north of Los Angeles, getting a job on a farm picking peaches. So it was kind of one of those work camp things where you're basically working for very, very, very little money, and they give you a place to stay. They give you, sometimes they would feed you, depending on who you worked for. And so he did that for a while. So when Roy was about 19, his sister said, "Hey, there's a radio station out in Inglewood, and that they're hosting a show where they're auditioning talent singers." The story goes as they were looking to form some kind of a group. Radio stations and how they entertain people was vastly different than it is today. Vastly, vastly different. You had a lot of times singers coming from, famous singers coming from all over the country, and then they would kind of tour radio stations and places and cities where they were going to perform, and they would, sing a song live or what have you. So his sister had made Roy a shirt because he was poor. He couldn't afford to go out to some store and buy a nice shirt, so she made one at home for him. So he goes into the radio station, and at that time, Roy was pretty shy. I mean, he had become a pretty good guitar player, but he was still pretty shy. So he goes out to the radio station and he performs. And well, a couple of days later, they call him back and they said, "Hey, would you like to join the Rocky Mountaineers?" And he says, "Boy, would I. What's it pay?" "Not very much." And well, you're going to struggle for a little while there, Roy. Now, the Rocky Mountaineers would go around. They would perform at local venues, traveling musicians. They would, however, not stay together very long. And of course, Roy at the time, he was going by the name of Len Sly. Now, I like that name. I like Len Sly. As a matter of fact, I think I like it better than Roy Rogers, me personally. So at this time now, Roy, known as Len, he joins and forms a couple other groups that didn't really pan out. So later on, Roy would link up with one Bob Nolan and Tim Spencer, and together they would form a group called the Pioneer Trio, and they would later bring on Hugh Farr, who was the fiddle player. So Tim was the singer, Bob was the bass player, Len, or Roy, was the guitar player, and of course Hugh on the banjo or the fiddle. So they became quite popular in the local Southern California region, and then later on they became popular all over the country because radio stations would send transcripts, as Roy would call it, or rebroadcast to other radio stations, and they would play their music. They would play or replay their live performances. And so later on, I guess a DJ at a radio station kind of changed up their name. He introduced them, instead of the Pioneer Trio, he introduced them as the Young Pioneers because, well, they were too young to the Sons of the Pioneers because, well, the guy, he figured that they were too young to be pioneers. I guess a pioneer was considered a man that was older or something like that. So they became the Sons of the Pioneers, and they would go and travel around the country performing at venues or whatever. But the Great Depression guys, yet again, so these guys are making very, very, very little money, and oftentimes they would go hungry at night. As a matter of fact, Roy said in an interview that oftentimes they would eat jackrabbits. They would just go hunting for jackrabbits, and then they would fry them up in their motel where they were staying at. So one day they were in Roswell, New Mexico, and they were performing, and a young woman had called in. Her name was Grace, and she said, "If you guys sing for me or sing your best yodel, I will bake you two of the biggest, most delicious lemon meringue pies you ever seen." And that was Roy's favorite dessert, was lemon meringue pie. So they went over there and sang for her, and she produced the pies, and that is how he met his second wife. Tragically, as she was giving birth to their second child, she would die about 3 days later, I believe, after that birth. So later on, after she passed, Roy would go on to meet his third wife, Dale, and they would be married over 50 years or so. So Roy Rogers, he got his start in Hollywood kind of a funny way. So at the time, he had gotten some bit roles in some cowboy movies. A couple of them with Gene Autry. Gene Autry was, of course, a very, very famous cowboy actor. And so he had heard that on a set of a Gene Autry movie that there was rumblings that Gene was in some kind of contract dispute over pay. So he goes to the picture company and, well, he can't get in because he's not working the picture. So he sneaks in with the other extras on the set. He just kind of wants to get in there and see what's doing. So he goes in there, and as he's walking with the extras, I mean, he looks like an extra. He's dressed the part. And a hand touches him on the shoulder. He says, "Oh, dang it. Oh, dang it. Here we go. Here we go." And he turned around, and he thought it was going to be a security guard kicking him out. But no, it was a producer. And he seen him, and he recognized him from the Sons of the Pioneers. And he said, ain't you Len Sly? And he says, "Well, yes, I am." And he auditioned for the role, and that's basically how Roy Rogers was born. Now, they didn't like the name Len Sly. I don't know. Again, I like that name. That's a movie star name to me. But they said that Len Sly just that wasn't the name that they were looking for. So they made up Roy Rogers. So they took Rogers, of course, from the late, great Will Rogers. And then Roy being the English name or the French name for king in English. So they called him Roy Rogers. And so it began an illustrious career known as the King of the Cowboys, and his wife, Dale, was known as the Queen of the Cowgirls. And they would go on to marry, have a few children, adopt several children, some of them with special needs. And, just even though I'm not a fan of Westerns, I'm a fan of like old Hollywood. I don't often say that very often, but it's kind of weird. I'm interested in old Hollywood history, not necessarily the movies, but who the people were behind the movies. And, Roy Rogers played in over 90 movies. And he had several, like maybe 50 or 100 of those half-hour TV shows on TV. And him and his wife had a TV show. And one of the most well-known and famous actors in the 1940s. I mean, this guy, he said, I never needed none of that slick Hollywood acting schools or coaches. He said, I never needed none of that because I always played myself. He was always Roy Rogers in every single thing that he did. He was the good guy who wouldn't kill you. He'd shoot the gun out of your hand if he could. And with his faithful horse, Trigger, who, by the way, we will be visiting Trigger one day. He's stuffed, and he's at the Roy Rogers Museum in Branson, Missouri. The Roy Rogers Museum used to be out here, and then they moved it. I don't know what date. This right here at 19838 Tomahawk Road in Apple Valley. This is the former home of Roy and Dale Rogers. And as you can see right there, has Roy Rogers inscribed on the gate in the iron ornamental fashion. You can kind of see a covered wagon over there, one over there. Don't want to get too close. I'm sure they got cameras, but I'm pretty sure they're used to people coming here and flying drones over their house, being kooky and creepy and weird and spooky. I probably should have mailed them a letter and said, hey, I'm a D-list celebrity YouTuber. Do you mind if you give me an inside tour of the home? But I'm sure they got better things to do than to talk to guys like me. But yeah, right Right on the golf course there. This nice little home right here. Well, not a little home, it's a big home, big house. Yeah. This is where Roy Rogers used to call home, right over here. Right over here. Ladies and gentlemen, the final resting place of Roy and Del Rogers, or as their names are emblazoned right there, Leonard and Francis Sly. Is that what you would call them? Rogers? They're Roy and Del Rogers. That's what I'm going to call them. And just a very wholesome man. And he came from a time where that no longer exists. And when I do these kinds of stories, I always kind of wonder what they would think if they were to be alive and give their opinion on what's going on in today's world and today's culture. Just a video as quick as I can. I know this video could have been 45 minutes, and maybe one day, you know, I'll make a longer video, but I just wanted to basically show you guys the grave, give a quick rundown on his career. Because the time of this video does not give it justice for the impact that he had on American culture and spreading American culture to different parts of the world. So, guys, the late and great Roy and Dale Rogers, rest in peace to both. Okay, looks like a funeral is gonna start soon, so I'm gonna feed the fishies, guys. Part of the crazy things I do, I always carry fish food with me, and I see some fish in the pond. Oh, and then now we got some new visitors. They just flew in. Where'd you guys fly in from? Albuquerque? That's what Bugs Bunny would say. All right, guys, I'm out of here. I'll see you on the next video. Peace out.
Happy trails to you. We'll meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling until then. Who cares about the clouds if we're together? Just sing a song and bring the sunny weather. Happy trail to you till we meet again.